Well, joining us now also from the CPAC conference, brilliant conservative conference. There'll be one next year. Make sure you put that in your diary, get tickets when they come out. Joining us now is Gordon Chang, an American columnist, author and lawyer. He wrote The Coming Collapse of China and Nuclear Showdown. North Korea Takes on the World. Gordon has lived and worked in China and Hong Kong for almost 2 decades. Gordon, you made a terrific speech there at CPAC, but now let me cut to the chase. The question all Australians want to know the answer to: does China have malicious intent towards Australia, or is it a benign business relationship?
It's malicious. First of all, Chinese leader Xi Jinping is propagating the notion that there is only one legitimate state in the world, and that's China. He is the world's sole ruler. Now, that sounds ludicrous, but unfortunately, you listen to what he says, you listen to his scholars, you listen to his officials. That's what they're telling us. And by the way, Rowan, they're not only talking about planet Earth, they're saying that the moon and Mars should be considered sovereign Chinese territories. These guys are dangerous, which means that Australia is not a sovereign state.
Rita?
Well, that's quite scary indeed. We've seen what's happened with Hong Kong. What are their plans for the rest of the world? And what's the timeline for these plans?
Well, Xi Jinping would like to have a very short timeline, but the problem is inside China right now, the country's falling apart. He has no answers for this. So he's trying to cut China off from the rest of the world. He's reimposing totalitarian social controls. He's going back to a state-dominated economy. It's all not working. And so his only answer is to lash out. And that means we got to be concerned because he can take us by surprise. He now has internal incentives to go to war.
So, Gordon, let me ask about those internal incentives, because every week I'm hearing some new story about a property fund collapsing, people not getting money back on their investments. At the same time, though, you'd have to say that Xi would be looking, say, at how Putin's invasion of Ukraine has turned into this kind of stalemate between him and the West. Do the events in Eastern Europe, would they be giving him any pause about the potential of a drawn-out conflict invading Taiwan, which of course is a big strait of water that you've got to get across, and then take, subdue, and occupy? Would he be concerned that that could be adding to his problems?
Yes, I'm sure that he was disappointed, maybe, by the slow Russian advance and now the problems. But you got to remember that Xi Jinping also views the failure of American and Western sanctions to stop Russia. And those sanctions aren't being enforced. So Xi Jinping looks at that and says, well, you're not enforcing sanctions against a clear aggressor. You're not going to enforce them against me because I'm China, and I rule the world. So there are a lot of different messages, some of them impeding him, some of them encouraging him. And by the way, James, China, yeah, it's not ready to go to war, but that doesn't mean it won't go to war because internally Xi Jinping has those reasons to lash out. So he can take us by surprise.
But also, Gordon, you've spoken about how you've picked up on the fact that Xi Jinping is purging elements of the military and explain those reasons, as well as the kind of language he's using to the troops. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Throughout this year, he's been purging officers in the People's Liberation Army, those who don't want to go to war. So, for instance, a senior Air Force general just mustered out recently, so he was former. But Liu Yaozhao, who was a very influential figure, was arguing against the Taiwan invasion. He got a death sentence early this year. But also we have seen in the rocket force, which controls most of China's nuclear weapons, there have been these extraordinary purges. There was a suicide in early July. The top 2 guys were really recently cashiered. These are unprecedented. And I think this is Xi Jinping trying to make sure that the new officers who control the rocket force will push the button when he demands that they do so.
Well, he's a dictator for life now, is he? Is there any issue with our reliance on China? Can we impose these harsh sanctions of them? Do we have any remedies available if they do go rogue?
Yeah, Australia is really dependent on selling all sorts of stuff to China. But Australians have got to remember that when there is a war, and Henry Kissinger, by the way, said it was probable, when there is a war, you're not going to be selling anything to China. So now's a good time to try to diversify. The other thing, though, is because the Chinese economy is imploding right now, you're not going to be selling as much to China in any event. So you got to find other customers because Australia is dependent on the sale of commodities.
Gordon, I just want to ask about, that with China and Australia, we've had a big Labour Party conference over the past few days where the Labour Party, which is in power here, seems to be very divided about its commitment to AUKUS, to the American alliance. How do you think China looks at ructions within the Labour Party in Australia, and in terms of whether or not they see us as willing to step up in a coalition against China if they were to do something kinetic against Taiwan, say?
Yeah, they're cheering on those who are opposed to the AUKUS deal. And when AUKUS was announced, go back to 2021, China threatened to incinerate Australia. It's not just that they want to take out our cities or Japanese cities or Taiwan. They're now thinking of Australia. So, yeah, you got to recognize that these are not friendly guys, going back to your question. And you got to defend yourself, because if you defend yourself and if you look that way, China's not going to touch you. But if they think that they can divide you, that they can get you out of AUKUS, they're going to go hard against you.
And tell us about the importance of Taiwan, both to us and to Xi Jinping, and also that sort of language about, daring to go to war that the troops are being given.
Yeah, well, Xi Jinping can't stop talking about going to war, and that message is filtered down through the ranks. So we hear, for instance, the Eastern Theater Command of the People's Liberation Army always talking about, we're ready to fight. And so we got to take these guys at their word. Of course, they're looking at Taiwan. Taiwan's important for a lot of reasons, Rowan, but one of them is that, look, China's going after all the world's democracies, including yours. We can't allow them to take over any democracy because they're also attacking the concept of democracy. So if we allow them to take over Taiwan, they're going to go after your democracy and my democracy and all the rest of them. So this is where we got to make a stand. If we are clear that we will defend Taiwan, Xi Jinping will also hear something else, that we are also clear about defending our own countries, not just Taiwan.
Now, up in the north, for example, north of Australia, we've got a couple of fishing boats up there or something like that that's there to defend us. Is the show of strength, and I guess to your democratic point of view, is the idea that we're so weak internally as a democracy, always running ourselves down? In Australia, you're probably aware how much shame our kids are taught about ourselves. Does that feed into Xi Jinping's confidence that we're pretty weak?
Yeah, well, that certainly does. And of course, the Chinese, the United Front Work Department of the Communist Party, for instance, they try to create these divisions and exacerbate them. They do it in the United States. I know they're doing it in Australia. And so they think that they can sort of divide the society, say, oh, you're X and you're Y and you're Z, and you should hate each other. And that's really the important element of Chinese propaganda right now and Chinese diplomacy. We have Chinese diplomats, for instance, in Canada, talking about white supremacy and all sorts of stuff. This is really serious stuff.
Gordon Chang, fascinating. Thank you so much for warning us. You've answered that question very, very clearly. There's lots of people in Australia kidding themselves that China is not a threat. But Gordon Chang, your book's important to read your book, and also thanks so much for talking to us here on Outsiders Today.